Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Looks like we've got a lot of people joining. I'm Laurie, and I'm the Go Live Serve Director of Communications, serving as the moderator for today's webinar. The topic for today's webinar came directly from our work as Global Local Mission Conference last fall, which I know that many of you attended. And the recordings from that conference are also available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to take a look back. There were many questions that came in from participants last year, and we wanted to address some of those. So we are doing a series of 3 webinars, and today is the second one. You can find the recording from the first webinar on our YouTube channel. One theme that emerged during last year's conference was around how to influence our workplace culture and build relationships. We received many questions on this, including how do you foster meaningful relationships with your coworkers when you mostly talk about work-related topics? And how can I change the culture of my workplace? Or another question was, what are some ways to collaborate with other believers in my workplace? So today we have gathered 3 panelists with a variety of experiences to discuss these questions. And we will hear from Christeen Rico, who lives in Silicon Valley and works in global store operations. Then Femi Sokoya, who lives in Silicon Valley, Femi Sokoya, who is a project manager in sales and strategy. And then finally, Corrie Napier, a mediator and international education specialist. Please note that the views and opinions of these speakers today are their own and not necessarily that of their employers. During the first half of our time together today, each speaker, will share a talk. Then we will have a live Q&A. Please use the YouTube live chat to ask questions, and you can also say hello and tell us today where you're joining in from. I will start off, before we have our first speaker, I'll start off with a prayer. Dear God, thank you so much for our work. Thank you that you created us to work. God, thank you that you put us together with so many different people at work and different groups of people. Please empower us to build relationships and cultures at our work that reflect and that glorify you. Thank you for each of our panelists, and we ask that you would use them today and speak through them. It's in your Son, Jesus' name, that we pray. Amen. And now I'd like to welcome our first speaker for today. Our first speaker is Christeen Rico. I think her slide's going to come up here. So Christeen was born in the Philippines and raised in the Bay Area. She studied in New York City and currently is based in Silicon Valley. She gets to enrich millions of people's lives around the world and through her work in global store operations at Apple. She is also on the advisory board of the Duzer Movement Workplace Ministry and Biola University Office of Innovation. Please join me in welcoming Christeen Rico.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Laurie, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this really exciting conversation, and love everything that Go Live Serve is doing in stewarding this ministry. I'm super honored to be here. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us live right now online from wherever you are. I hope that you're staying healthy and doing well today. So as I was thinking about this topic of cultivating meaningful relationships, influencing workplace culture, a quote came to mind, and it's something that I had heard from a mentor of mine in my workplace, and I've kind of evolved it and made it my own. And basically, it's this idea that we, as followers of Jesus, right, in all areas of our lives, including as employees of a company, are commanded to love. So we, as followers of Jesus, in all areas of our lives, including as employees of companies, are commanded to love. Companies, however, or employers, have no real obligation to love us. And it's a very humbling thought that, again, we are commanded to love, but our companies and the environments that God may have us in a season have no explicit obligation to love us. Of course, there's legal obligations, etc., but to love is just a whole entirely new standard that only Christ has perfectly modeled for us. And so with that, I always start off with remembering that command in Matthew 22:36-40, where Jesus was asked, "What is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And this is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is like it, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. And all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." And I remember, that just always strikes me, like all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments: to love God and to love our neighbors. And Jesus says as well, in John 14, "Anyone who loves me will obey my teaching." And so as followers of Jesus, how do we love God? How do we show love to Jesus? It's through our obedience to his teaching, to his commands. And Jesus says that anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. My Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them. Anyone who does not love me will not obey my teaching. And these words you hear are not my own. They belong to the Father who sent me. And so it's that foundational kind of belief in the commands of Jesus, and that if I desire to love Jesus, I ought to obey the things that he has commanded, which are not optional, and that includes loving. And I've also been very convinced throughout my journey with the Lord that living in obedience to God is the best place to be. I'm just personally convinced of that in my own life. And so that's really been my ongoing pursuit, including in how I approach my career and my work, is this desire to live in obedience to God, because I do firmly believe that that is the best place to be. And so before I get into kind of the specific, like how to, which I know that's the fundamental question of this webinar, I do think it's important to share a little bit about just the foundational inner working that the Lord has had me on in terms of how I think about my work and how I approach my day to day. And it really starts off with three key questions for me. And the three questions are: who is God? Who does God say I am? And why do I do what I do? And it's been very vital for me to stay conscious of my responses to those three questions of who is God? God is the creator of all things. He is the Lord of all lords, the King of all kings. He is my savior. He is my friend. He's my heavenly Father. And who does he say I am? He actually, calls me his workmanship, his masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God had prepared in advance for me to do. God calls me his beloved, right? He calls me his daughter. And I get to be a co-creator with God, since I am created in the image and likeness of a God who himself creates, and he invites me into his big plan for this world. And that is who I am. I'm a daughter of the Most High King, a co-creator with God. I'm a minister for Jesus in this world. And with that, I think about then why do I do what I do? And I think it is very important as we go about our work in whatever context that we are in, to know your why. Why do you do what you do? And what is your definition of success? Because if we don't think about that for ourselves, we might just find ourselves considering the definitions of success that the world offers. And that might come with some risk. And so, for me, why I do what I do, and my definition of success has certainly evolved through the years. And at this stage, I summarize it in this way. For me, success in all areas of my life is to pursue growth in the likeness of Jesus each day, in my character, in my competency, and in my community. Again, it's to pursue growth in the likeness of Jesus each day, in my character, in my competency, and community. And I'm very intentional in that word pursue, because I don't know if any of you can relate, but I am kind of a achievement oriented person, pretty type A. And so I always want to be making progress. And I find that, that then over time, as I'm continuing to see progress in my career, progress in my faith walk, or progress in my ministry, I get so fixated on the things that I can measure, right? And the progress, that I lose sight of then the person that I am worshiping, and the person who has entrusted me with this ministry, with this calling in the first place. And so I have shifted, and for me, it's a successful day if I can say honestly that today I am pursuing growth in the likeness of Jesus, just seeking that, as opposed to pursuing success for myself, or pursuing recognition from others, or pursuing a higher salary, or pursuing a relationship, etc. Am I pursuing growth in the likeness of Jesus, in character, competency, and community? And it reminds me of one of my life verses, which is Matthew 6:33. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. And I've really held on to that promise throughout my life, including now as I approach my everyday. And so in terms of, measures of success, right? We have a definition of success, then how do you measure it? For me, I go back to the word of God. So in terms of character, I think about the fruit of the Spirit, and love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Are those things holistically evident in my thoughts, in my words, in my actions? Again, not perfect. I'm not always making progress every day, but I am pursuing it every day. And hopefully, by God's grace, through the work of the Holy Spirit in me, those things can continue to grow in and through my life. So character, fruit of the Spirit, is sort of my baseline standard. For competency, thinking about Colossians 3:23, and whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. And really doing my best with no shortcuts, right? Whether someone is looking or not, always pursuing the best possible outcome for this project or this deliverable that I'm working on, and to constantly push myself to keep learning, surrounding myself with people who are more seasoned, more experienced, so that I can learn from them, and not assuming that I know everything, but actually, in humility, pursuing to be better by always surrounding yourself with people you can learn from. And then thirdly, community, right? How do we grow more like Jesus in community? And this one is definitely, will always be a work in progress. But I think about Philippians 2:3-11 in particular has been a passage that has struck me as I approach relationships in my workplace. And I'm just going to read it a little bit. It says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, Jesus made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Again, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. And so, again, definition of success and how I approach work, pursuing growth in the likeness of Jesus in character, competency, community. And with that every day, trying to keep that top of mind for me is very, very important. And that discipline of spending time with the Lord each day so that I remain conscious of these things that I firmly believe, because it is for me more important to like who I am becoming, even more than whatever it is that I might be achieving. I do think, at least for me growing up and being in the industry that I am in, which can be very demanding and competitive, and also, very energizing. I do find my work in itself to be very energizing. And it can be very easy to get caught up in just doing the stuff and then getting ahead, moving ahead, that you forget about who you are and who you are becoming. And so it's been vitally important for me to remain conscious of these things as a daily practice. And it's interesting that the more that I have pursued this definition of success and growth in the likeness of Jesus in these areas of my life, the more that God has actually expanded my impact and influence in my workplace. And it's not been the intention, but it's just how God works sometimes. And, just some of these examples, in my work at Apple, I over time got the opportunity to co-lead my company's employee resource group, Christian employee resource group. So we have a Christian community within the company. And as part of this, I've had experiences of just getting a lot of favor with senior executives who trusted me to be able to host internal events where they could share how their faith impacts their work. And as you might be able to imagine, as a senior leader, that can be a really tricky thing to do at a large tech company, but it's been, again, a blessing for me to have that opportunity to steward that kind of a ministry, giving a platform for senior leaders to share how their faith impacts their business strategy. And the impact that has had on hundreds of people across the company has been tremendous. God has used me and the team of volunteers that I've gotten a chance to work with to launch internal mentorship programs that then help lay foundations for a broader company-wide mentorship programs to really help people grow professionally and personally and in their career. I've also, leveraged this opportunity as the Christian Employee Resource Group leader to host somewhat controversial intersectional community service events between, the Christian group, the Pride group, the African American Employee Resource Association group, and working together to serve the community in the Castro district in San Francisco, right? And it's just creating these spaces where otherwise, people or these groups of people would not rub shoulders, but in the spirit of love and trying to understand and, again, shift culture in the workplace, and even for myself, just shift my own heart and try to cultivate understanding for different groups of people that I may not fully understand their experiences. I've been able to sort of create these spaces through service to come together, learn from each other, and have a broader impact on the community together. In my role in retail store operations, God has used me in different ways to build bridges between organizations and teams that never used to interact. And most recently, last year, again, I work for a global retail organization. And last year when COVID hit, our company announced on March 13th, 2020, that we would be closing all of our retail stores outside of Greater China. So we have over 450 stores in over 20 countries. And that was March 13th. And then the weekend happened. And then on March 16th, I remember getting a phone call from my senior leaders and got the invitation to help with COVID reopening. So we closed off over 450 stores across 20 countries. And we knew at some point we would need to reopen these stores. And of all the people that got the call on Monday, I get the call on Monday. And overnight, I was transitioned off of all the other projects that I was working on to support what was the top priority for the organization, which was COVID response, COVID reopening, and understanding how do we continue to keep people safe and be there for our customers during this tumultuous time across all these different countries. And so, again, it's just been fascinating how the more that I have actually pursued internal transformation in myself, the more that God has expanded my influence and my impact in my workplace. And today, in this season of life, God has continued to shift my focus and open up opportunities and invitations for me to steward these unique experiences that He's given me to help impact other parts of the world. And most urgently right now for me is focusing back on my place of birth, which is the Philippines. And God is continuing to reveal to me how my experiences over this past decade working on international assignments and launching digital products, physical operations, and new markets from early due diligence through execution, how all of that is actually 100% leverageable for a new mission that He's inviting me to be a part of, which is to help transform culture and cultivate generational flourishing in my place of birth, which is the Philippines, through entrepreneurship and business. And it's this vision of, how might we shift mindset from a poverty mindset to an abundance mindset? How do we shift behaviors from an employee to an owner? How do we shift the vision for success in the country? Because right now the vision is to leave the country, and that's where the opportunity is. But how do we shift that by creating so much opportunity inside the country so the next generation will aspire to stay? Because they could see that there is growth, there is opportunity staying in the Philippines and not leaving. And a big part of this new mission invitation that God has opened up for me is bridge building and leveraging, again, all of these international assignments that He's given me over the years in my work in Silicon Valley to then form those right bridges from early due diligence through execution for bringing the appropriate resources to bless the country of the Philippines. And so it's a work in progress. But again, there's so much opportunity there for, as we remain open to God and pursue growing more like Jesus. It's mind-blowing what God might reveal to us in our workplaces and beyond. So I hope people are encouraged by some of these examples.
Thank you very much, Christine. You shared so much in your talk. I love how you started out just with the concept of love and talking about how, we're first supposed to love God and obey His commands. And then, the second is to love others. And I think that's really important as we start this topic today, how to build relationships and affect culture is that very item of just, it starts out with love, loving Jesus and really truly loving those around us. So I appreciate that. And I love one of the other verses you shared. I'm just going to read that again in Philippians 2:3-4. It says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interests of others. And I think in the workplace, especially you working in Silicon Valley, where that's like the height of, kind of this the rat race, trying to get better things at work. I think that's great that's a verse that you're living by. I think that's fantastic. I do have a specific question for you about employee resource groups. You mentioned that briefly, your work with employee resource groups. If somebody is interested in starting one of those at their work or checking to see if their work has one, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think checking internally, partnering with your HR organization, usually in your internal employee websites, et cetera, you'll be able to find different groups that employees can join. Okay. And then if you're interested in starting one, a nonprofit, again, founded in Silicon Valley, but has global networks as well, as faithandworkmovement.org. You just spell that out, faithandworkmovement.org. And this organization has helped many employees across different companies get started on that process of launching a formal employee resource group. So I'd highly recommend partnering with them.
Fantastic. That's a great resource. Thank you. All right,
You're
well, we're
welcome.
going to bring you back on in a few minutes for Q&A. All right, thank you very much. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get to our next speaker. I did want to mention that today's webinar is hosted by 3 different organizations. Those organizations are Called to Work, Go Live Serve, and Theology of Work. And actually, our next speaker was recently featured on Theology of Work's podcast, Making It Work. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker now. His name is Femi Sokoya. And Femi is a project manager and more generally an implementation and strategy professional. His education and cultural background influence him to think through both his journeys in life and as a professional as systems full of redemptive story. As an active member of his church, Femi sees his individual mission as bringing forth gospel-centered kingdom justice manifested through spirit-filled individuals maximized in community. And work is a part of that community. So please welcome Femi Sokoya.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here with you. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Christine. I think Christine and I are reading definitely the same book. Amen, amen, and amen. I feel really honored to be here. I wanted to talk about why I'm here with Christine and Corrie. Well, it's really, really humbling for me. I'm an individual contributor at my workplace, and I think that one of the benefits I have is being able to focus on some small stuff, so you don't get too intimidated by big stuff. Not everyone is going to be able to lead the fight on that massive scale, and the way that I think I have an engineering education is one where it helps me think of the overall system. So Sunday is right now one of the most, and going to that Philippians passage, one of the most divisive, segregated racially and sometimes economically hours of the week. You might not be able to fix that by yourself, and not everyone's going to be able to make huge strides as a tent maker in their organization, but all the little things we do incrementally matter. So I know that we should all be trusting the Spirit to lead us, and as far as getting into what that means as actions, again, gonna harken back to Christine. Purpose matters. So what's the purpose of me talking today? I'm gonna do 2 big things that I'm hoping to accomplish. Is 1, don't be scared about being an influencer, but the promises of persecution are real. So be wary and be ready. And then 2, I'm just sharing what I've learned so far practically that's been really helpful for me. So the Theology of Work podcast, summing up some of that conversation, I worked at a company where I was probably underprepared for what I was really doing, to be honest, and had a lot of bad feedback coming to my manager from one of my project supervisors, and they weren't coming to me, and I was really angry. So I talked about how we started to reconcile that situation. And as we get into the details of what I'm talking about today, I'll be able to go back to that conversation and sort of pull you into that thought process. But it really helped me start to think about why I needed to potentially leave that organization. But it didn't make me like become best friends with this person, or it's for me to blow everybody away. It just is one of those things that it made me think differently. So I'll share that. So one of the things I've learned from working is it helps to lay out a problem and then see if you have a solution to it. Sometimes bosses say, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. So this is one of the problems. In scripture, Matthew 5:11, it says, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed when people insult you and persecute you falsely and say all kinds of evil things against you because of me. That's Matthew 5:10 and 11. And then in John 16:33, I've told you these things so you may have peace. In this world you'll have trouble, but take heart, for I have overcome the world. Now it seems more and more like these times are coming more and more often for people who decide to be tent makers, especially if they're not in leadership in different organizations. So people are more nervous about how they integrate faith and work. And all the organizations we've mentioned are great resources for you. I do want to highlight a clear difference about what Jesus said and how we apply it a lot that I see. We talk about the world, and we typically dichotomize it, or may have a dichotomy of the world being non-Christians and us as Christians all agreeing. But we all know, unfortunately, that it's not always true that we agree. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes we still separate based off of race or class, and it really affects our picture of unity. And again, I want to bring us together in that gospel-centered community, focused on this unity that we can do, manifested by us as spirit-filled individuals. So let's break this down into 4 groups that I think really help me, and see if the group that I think is the problem is the problem. So we have 2 religious groups and 2 irreligious groups. And the 2 religious groups we normally talk about, we have stagnant religion, like where people who are not consistently in the word for the sake of growing and changing and morphing things, but potentially for being more right or trying to give themselves more freedom. And those groups are really hard to talk to, but they're in the family overall of faith, still believe in Jesus, and that can be hard. Then there's a religious group of people who are prudent, who are shaping themselves and moving and changing, and we see the Spirit working in them. Those people might disagree with us sometimes, but they'll work with it through us. Similarly, on the irreligious side, there are people who are receptive to hearing about things. But the group that I think that a lot of people are scared about when it comes to talking about integrating faith and work are this sort of irreligious group that are hostile to things of faith. We're scared about that sometimes because it's punitive. Do we stand our ground? Do we be bold? Are we patient? Do we leave? Do we have to fire somebody? Those are really hard questions. So if you agree with that problem, hopefully a lot of the things I'm going to say after this are going to help out. My profession, as Lori mentioned, and it was in the preview, is project management, and people in execution, as Christine mentioned, being in execution as well, you have to sort of live and die by what the purpose is. Because the purpose is going to define your priorities. Our purpose is to love God, love others. In the Westminster Shorter Catechism, it says to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. Now, we have to do a lot of work here, but making sure that we understand that is really critical, because there's a fall. And the fall led to us developing systems of currency. Currency, we have to work to get money. And as Christine mentioned, it's not always the purpose of God that is manifested in our workplace purposes. For instance, the company I work for is trying to make some really big visual strides for social change. And some of those are excellent, and I'm all for them. And others I cannot back because of staying close to the word and wanting to be close to the word. That's my current environment. So my big 3 points about what can you practically do to make a difference in your workplace and in your culture and how it affects you, and then making sure that we're also talking about what does it mean to really, really foster those relationships. Let's talk about those things. Number 1 is process, because you change your company, you can change your company, but your company changes you. Number 2 is perception, and that's a key factor in deciding if something is meaningful. And so we'll talk about goal setting. And then practicality, because Jesus used a lot of practical examples. So let's get into process. So first P, we'll do 3 Ps as Christine did 3 Cs. Most of the time we think about our companies as a place we get to influence, and that's true. We can go with the stream or against it, and our company in a local area can be with the stream and against it. But we don't really sometimes believe that we can impact our workplaces. And why do I say that? Is because most of you probably don't go to what we would call bad or struggling churches, right? You go to churches that are thriving. You want to see your churches thrive. You want to see them succeed. And the reason is because you understand that that culture in the church is going to impact you, your family, potentially your kids or your friends that you go to church with. And that's not a bad thing. You pick the culture to impact you. But jobs don't work that way, because sometimes the jobs we really want or are skilled at, that God has gifted us for, really have a culture that eats our strategies for lunch. That's a very common phrase. Ask anyone who's in change management, and they'll let you know that you have to get the right people in the right place to sustain a change you want to see. And churches have a hard time of doing that. So we try to pick ones that we think are good on the outset. We try to pick companies that are good on the outset. Part of this process is about contextualization. Sorry. Remember that Jesus was a Jew, a Nazarene from the tribe of Judah, in the line of David. He didn't show the work, but he was shaped by the culture in which he grew up. He knew the scrolls. He knew the challenges he would get. He knew, and we can know a lot the better we perform and the more that we have exposure. But the idea here is that it takes time for people to learn how to rise quickly. Other people might be just good at reading things, but do not be afraid if it's taking a long time. As a Black man in a mostly white church, in a mostly white city, in a mostly white company, the significant traditional education that I have is helpful, but there's so much I've had to learn with patience. How I speak, when I speak, where I speak, what I say, all of those things have helped me in my education about how does God want me to use my voice and my things of talent, skill, etc. The ROI is not always there to speak. Sometimes it's there to be silent. And that process of learning leads to the second point, perception. Um, I have a perception as I'm learning more from my work culture about my colleagues, which people work hard and which appear to and not to work hard. I think that I'm that kid who questions why do people with the best offices never get to use them because they're always in meetings. But I'm also that kid who goes along at times and says, well, she said it twice in an email, so that's what we're going to do. Let's just get it done. Perception is difficult to deal with because there's that cynicism of the people who play golf together getting further ahead, or those who don't have family obligations are more free to make all the business events. And it's true. Sometimes you see executives shave, and it's not because they need to, but it's also not the presidency of Rutherford B. Hayes. Look it up, big beard. You work in the, say it with me, first P, process of contextualization to understand how you may be perceived. I can't wear my undergrad gear at my grad school, vice versa, due to some one-sided rivalry. But people perceive you. And you have to understand that by understanding that through the process of contextualization. And also you have to make sure that you understand in that you're perceiving them. In my first year and a half of marriage, my wife and I argued about many things, and she never forces me to say I'm wrong. She usually agrees with me, actually, but my tone and my attitude can be horrible. And I have to remember that my questions can sound like accusations. So in my work, are all the activities I'm doing really making that difference? In major US cities, I never perceive that I'm being persecuted for faith first. I am a 6'1" big Black guy. Like, there's other things that people are looking at. Do you know your audience? Understand that perception is really, really key. Don't make assumptions about others either. You don't want them to assume about you. Don't assume about them. Just because there's a disagreement or you think there's going to be a disagreement, change that assumption if you believe that God values all people to assume that there will be a conversation for clarity. Assume this person might be CEO and you're trying to guide them to that summit. Perception is a really big part of seeing what is meaningful. You have process and perception. So you have to think of goals. And with goals, those are things that we get into the practical piece. So the final P, pragmatism, you have to be practical about all of these goals. If you look at it, Jesus was a carpenter. He took dead things and made them useful, which is what he did with our lives. And his two main ways to teach were parable and questions. You have a story you're trying to tell. So what is that story? What's your testimony? If you look at it carefully, you have the ability to understand how that sets your public and your private goals. Those goals are the mission statements that we have are really helpful. And sometimes when we make them public, it helps other people understand that we're really there for them. We're dedicated to the team, and it defines success differently. It makes people want to share with us and gives us more freedom to share with them. I've been able to form so many more and better relationships with coworkers, even though they're not necessarily my best friends, by being able to understand that that's a part of my testimony, sharing my weekend. And you can tell a story just like Jesus, a story about a dude trying to find a sheep, a woman trying to find a coin. You lost your wallet or your phone recently. Jesus looks for you like you look for that coin. You have to understand that the process of contextualization and understanding your own perception, that you know as least as much as the guy who was in the parable of the shrewd manager, right? Who knew that his boss was going to fire him. Jesus told all of these stories, and that's something that you have the ability to do. But going through the process of contextualization, understanding the perceptions of people have of you and what you have of them can help you with that storytelling and crafting and being practical, because that's the thing that really gets us. We understand the parable of the seeds. We understand all of those things. They're pragmatic dividends. You're asking probably like why'd they pick you to be on the panel, and in the last couple minutes I want to say I sat down with this manager at my old job and we talked for 2 hours on a day that she didn't want to stay late, about all the things in her background, all the things in mine. I asked question after question to understand her and was able to answer mine. And at the end, we understood each other better. Um, the rest of our work relationship was great. It was absolutely great. And it made us closer. It made us understand each other better. But the way that that thought process happened was going through the process of understanding who I was in that context. How was she perceiving me? Was I important enough to be a frustration for her? No, I wasn't. Did I think she could be the CEO of the company one day? Yeah, she could. I wanted to love her because that's part of my goal. And to glorify God is not about getting myself to not feel ticked about bad feedback, but to understand how that can shape me. See, the gospel work that we do can be shaped by our secular learnings. God gives us those things and we need to take them to heart. So um, I want to say that like your job is not an apologist as a tent maker. You're a tent maker. You got to make tents. Christine mentioned it again, Ephesians 2:10, we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which he prepared for us in advance to do. Do those things, try to do good. Your job is not always defending the faith, but by doing good and loving well, people really start to change. I promise it seems like it's not a big thing, but it is. To close out, we have a daughter, 6 months old, and a baby on the way. And whoop. And I'll close off with a Chance the Rapper quote, which is his Arthur remix of the theme song of Arthur, which we got to correct some of the theology in that song. But I'm going to get by when the going gets rough. I'm going to love life till I'm done growing up. And when I go down, I'm going to go down swinging. My eyes still smiling and my heart still singing. You can let your heart sing out. Just make the tent. Glorify God and enjoy him forever. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Femi. I loved what you shared about the 3 Ps. I'm just going to repeat those. You shared about process, perception, and pragmatism. And with the perception, I was really thankful that you shared about, taking time to understand how others may view you. And then also taking the time to not make assumptions about how you're viewing others, taking it both ways, not just spending all the time on how are they viewing me, but also taking into consideration, do you have any assumptions about them as well? That was really helpful. I'm curious, as you shared about having that conversation with your boss, that must have been fairly intimidating to come to your boss and have such a honest and open conversation. So I'm curious about your preparation for that. What did that look like? Did you talk through it with yourself? How did you prepare? Did you pray about it? How long did you wait? Did you send an email? Did you I'm curious about your
If I still had that work computer, I might still have the calendar invite. I think it was in October of that year. But I think about her every single year in October because that was sort of the hard thing. In my preparation, I went through the same sort of 3 Ps of understanding that I've been there for less time. I do not understand the processes and how it fits into the big picture. I thought that this was my role. What are people perceiving? And so I took some of the feedback that I got and was like, okay, people are perceiving that. Don't love it. But how am I perceiving her? Do I really know her? Do I really know what her life is like outside? I had a similar situation when I was in college of a Chinese lab assistant who was working with us and helping us with our labs, but I couldn't understand him that well. And I remember switching my thinking to oh, this probably has to be hard for him at the grocery store too, or getting gas, or just getting help outside of the classroom. And it made me feel more empathy and compassion. And I thought about that for her, and that helped me come up with the questions about who's your family, who's your support, where are you from, what are your hobbies? And those are the questions I wrote down to prepare for that conversation first. Then I got into the work questions of how did you learn how to be good at your job? How did you learn that this is something that you think I'm not good at that I can help you with? And how do you think that I can improve to get to the place that you are? And really thinking about can I push her forward to be the best she can be Or do I just want to defend myself and say, hey, I'm trying? One of my login names for like a Christian website was just trying, because in the same way I'm pursuing to be more and more like God, but I know that like success is hard and sanctification is a process. But those are the things that sort of led to that conversation. She might still have the calendar invite from those years ago, way back, and but it was awkward to have an invite and send these questions saying, oh, hey, I want to talk about this stuff. But it changed in my heart from I'm trying to prove how well I am to I want to understand. Jesus understands all of us so much that he knows when we're hurting, even though it doesn't feel like it sometimes. He knows when you're stressed out at work. He knows when the deadline seems too aggressive. But in that freedom to realize in Galatians 5:1, freedom, Christ has set you free, you can have the conversation without the pressure, and it takes that away. And it's allowed me to be more humble about the things I just can't do. And to say, like, what should I learn? And so Christine had a really good point to it earlier about putting yourself around better people and asking and developing those mentorships. So it takes a lot of that off when we think about that eternal perspective. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. I can imagine coming into that meeting and her seeing your heart and your authenticity really brought down a lot of those defenses that maybe both of you might have had.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a great perspective of somebody in a hierarchical work environment who was able to kind of influence from underneath. So that's a great example. Thank you. All right. Well, we'll bring Femi back on in a little bit for the Q&A. There is Q&A coming up. So for those of you that are watching the live stream, please type any questions that you have into the live chat on the live stream. And we will be looking at those as well as some of your questions from registration to ask the speakers in a little bit. And now I'd like to introduce our third and final speaker for today, and then we'll get into the Q&A. Our next speaker is Corrie Napier. Corrie is a conflict consultant, a trainer, mediator, and international education professional who specializes in helping individuals and organizations navigate conflict and enhance effective communication. She is trilingual, and she draws daily upon over a decade of experience living and working internationally. And she's predominantly lived and worked in China, Argentina, and Israel. Please welcome Corrie Napier.
Thank you, Laurie. And thank you, Femi, for basically giving a wonderful outline of the kind of conversations that I train people to do every single day. It's called learning conversations as a mediator and a conflict consultant. And it's a privilege to speak on this topic of building authentic and meaningful work relationships and how to develop a workplace culture. And as much as I am just so immersed in the mediation world at the moment, I live here in Virginia Beach, I really felt led to share about my time in China, living and serving in Shanghai. And as the other speakers were talking, though, there's a song on my heart. And when there's a song on my heart, I just got to sing it, and I'm going to do it in obedience. And this is how this song comes from a prayer that I pray with my husband every day before we start our day. We grab hands. When we're still lying in bed, we grab hands and we say the Lord's Prayer together. And this is from the Lord's Prayer, so just receive it. Let it be on earth. Let it be on earth. Let it be on earth as it is in heaven. Let it be on earth. Let it be on earth. Let it be on earth as it is in heaven. I'm just taking a big breath because I'm just saying amen, because the Lord is the one that does all the things that we are talking about today. And I'm a witness of that in my own life. And as capable as we are as successful as we are, he is the one that works through us to do the work. And that's just what stands out to me, as we just say, Lord, let it be on earth as it is in heaven. Let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And what does heaven look like in my job? What does heaven look like in my work relationships? What does it mean to declare that every day into my workplace, and then watch as the fruit unfolds, and watch? One of the verses that guides me is the idea of how Jesus lived, which is what he said in John 5:19. I tell you the truth, the Son can do nothing by himself. He does only what he sees the Father doing. So to ask yourself, Lord, what are you doing today? And how can I live in that kind of an alignment with you, where I'm walking according to what you're doing? And I'm telling you, our lives have got to get a lot quieter than they are. And that is on us as leaders, as believers in the workplace, is in the midst of all the chaos, we have got to quiet our souls and listen to how the Lord is guiding. When I moved to China, a lot of people asked me, so are you going for ministry? Are you going for missions? And are you going for business? And I got stuck with the answer, because I just said yes, and yes. I think it's it's an interesting question that we get asked. I was really drawn to the Chinese language, and I explored a couple different cities in China. And one of them was with an opportunity to do traditional missions, in the sense that you could in China, where you go as an English teacher and you're ministering in universities. And the second thing that we looked at was an opportunity to plant ourselves in a huge city, Shanghai, and to learn Chinese and then see what happened. And as I prayed about it, and as my husband and I prayed about it, we just got this sense of Shanghai is our territory. So I think as any place in the world I've ever lived, and I've lived in a bunch of different places, but primarily my time in China, I just sensed, as I talked to the people, as I got to know the church there, as I got to kind of feel out that area, my spirit just got activated. And I just felt this sense as I prayed about it of, this is the territory. This is where I'm to plant myself. I don't know for how many years, I don't know how long, but signed up for language school and dove into 2 years of Chinese language school. And as the Lord had it, I was introduced to an amazing school, a K-12 bilingual school that was a huge network of international schools across China, and was able to apply my experience from the US into that position really seamlessly. And I became the head of admissions for this school. And I got to oversee a team that went from 2 people up to 10 people by the end of my 9 years at this school. And so I was able to build this incredible team, starting with 2 people. And so as a manager, I know a lot of us here are not managers. If we are managers, you will have a chance to influence the kind of work culture in your team if you are responsible for overseeing people. I also want to suggest that if you're not a manager, you still have a big circle of influence. And there are tons of ways, by being your authentic self and by living in that alignment with the Lord every day. Lord, what are you doing? I want to do what the Father is doing. You will see your influence grow. And as I just committed myself to praying that prayer, Lord, let it be on earth as it is in heaven, I saw my work as ministry. I never differentiated the two of missions. And I was open every day to, Lord, are you going to kind of open up a conversation for me with a coworker about you? And Lord, make me a great manager. So it was always both and. It wasn't like business and missions. It was just, it's an amazing experience to kind of get into that flow with the Lord every day, where he begins to merge those realities for us. And we begin to see the kingdom come onto earth, because we start to see. So how do we notice that? What I want to talk about is kingdom values. How do you know when your workplace starts to buzz with kingdom values? Something I saw is I built a very multicultural team. We had admissions staff from China, from Australia, from Ireland, from the UK, and from the US. And as I saw these people come together, I recognized, there's definitely conflict. There's definitely misunderstandings. So I saw this team that the Lord gave me, and I just saw it as he's entrusting me as a steward to this little family of a team. And at work, we spend so much time with those people. They are like our family. And with how the Lord put on my heart to manage these people, it was like creating a family. And so we did strengths assessments to find out what were people's gifts. We did things that began to stir up these kingdom values. I began to just infuse what I knew and what I sensed were these kingdom values, like unity, affirmation, encouragement, vulnerability, authenticity, lightheartedness, and fun. To me, the Holy Spirit is the most lighthearted, fun, amazing friend. And he wants us to function in unity. He's created that for us. So when he released me to be in this team in Shanghai, I knew that he was connecting me with that team. I also sensed him connecting me with my local church, and an incredible Bible study and small group that helped equip me every day with the encouragement that I needed, and just the ministry and prophetic words and just incredible affirmation over me to keep going every day in the workplace, and to create this team, which then soon after building it in Shanghai became a whole regional team. And I became the director of admissions for the entire country of China. So I got a really amazing chance to see what he was doing as I began to travel all over these different cities. And that's how the Lord expanded my territory. But in the beginning, it was literally just a laser focus on, all right, I've got these 2 staff. What can I do with them today that would serve them, and that would serve these parents who are trying to find an international school to the kids? That was our clientele. I wanted to just serve the heck out of everybody that was in the workplace. We had teachers we were interacting with, principals, and all these people from the whole world coming together in this one school. And I just had this sense of, man, if I go deep with the little that I've been given, all the people around me that are in my little influence, they are going back around all over the world. And I recognized just how strategic the Lord had been in placing me in this organization that would then have a global impact. And even if you're not working in an international organization, we cannot underestimate the impact that we have as we begin to sow the seeds of what the Lord has put inside of us into our workplaces. It's like that ripple becomes just bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's this expanding influence in the world. So I want to give an example of something that I did that was kind of embracing that those kingdom values. I took the staff on a retreat, and we did a crazy fun scavenger hunt where everybody got to be like little kids and enter the kingdom as little children. It was just this kind of thing on my heart, and it bonded people together in this incredible way where people began to be more vulnerable and authentic and sharing. And another example was at the end of the retreat. I don't know why, but as I was praying about it and thinking about, Lord, what kind of an activity could I do to kind of build some unity, because there had been a division between a couple of the members of my team. And I got this picture in my mind's eye as I prayed about it of these crowns, like paper crowns. And call me crazy, but I designed an activity where everybody got to help design a crown for a colleague that called out what they really appreciated in that colleague. And it gave them kind of a title of sharing what they appreciated about that and who they were. And then to present, they got to get up and present that crown to the colleague. And, we're in our 20s, 30s, like we're all adults. And yet I saw this joy just spark from my colleagues as they gave each other these crowns. And then I was not expecting this, but they had quickly written me one because they recognized, oh gosh, Corrie hasn't gotten one. And they began this just uproar of applause and putting on this crown. And it was just one of the most touching moments I saw of literally what I could describe as an explosion of joy in the workplace. And we were out, 5-6 tours a day, helping families understand the school. It was grueling work, processing all of these applications, just staying late every night. And so to have these moments where I was able to bring the team together, I could see they really appreciated that. And what started to happen, just like Christine mentioned, the fruit of the Spirit just emerged on my team. And they began to work together better. And we began to really serve those parents really well. And I began to just trust, okay, Lord, everything that I'm doing, that I don't see what I don't see. I only see what I can see with my eyes. And as I just trusted in that small little piece that I was given, we just began to see parents making an informed decision and thriving and helping their kids feel more comfortable in a new city. We saw people come alive and spark with new ideas. It was just a season of time over 9 years of being able to steward this territory that the Lord gave me. And I think in your workplace too, you can begin to know, okay, Lord, how do I know if I'm walking in alignment with you? How do I know if the kingdom is coming through me and my workplace and through me and whoever the community is, the body of believers that you've brought me into? How do I know if I'm being impactful? How do I know if I'm walking in alignment with you? And I'll tell you, look for the fruit of the Spirit. Look for joy. Look for peace. Look for patience, self-control. I love what Femi described of, authenticity and vulnerability in going to that boss in a conversation that took guts and took humility. And all of these incredible values of the kingdom, fruits of the Spirit. Watch for those. Those can show up in a traditional secular workplace all of the time and can be an indicator that we are on the right track as we are learning to know, okay, Lord, what is my assignment and how can I steward it well? What is my territory? I did have the privilege, I'll end with this quick story. I did have the privilege of having a lunch where a certain staff member stayed after. She was a Chinese staff member who was a member of the Communist Party, and she was a very much kind of secular in her ideas of really non-religion, just a lot of just Confucius ideas and that kind of thing, general wisdom practices, but and a little bit influence from Buddhism. And she knew I was going through a very big personal tragedy. And she was just asking me, how are you experiencing joy? Like, why are you like, if I were going through what you were going through, I would be so sad. Why aren't you angry? And I was able to, in that lunch conversation, which went for an hour and a half, I was able to share my faith with her just in a very simple way about how I was getting through tragedy, how I was experiencing sadness and anger, and also joy because of my relationship with the Lord and the things that God was doing in my life just spilled out so naturally. And that inquisitiveness happened, not because I forced it, not because, okay, I have to go and minister to my team, but just in the way that I was able to do life. And I think if we live authentically in alignment with the Lord, those things will come up, and recognizing that ministry is not just ministering to in a traditional way, but ministry is living in alignment. And a lot more I can say, but I'm going to end there.
Ministry is just living in alignment and looking for the fruits of the Spirit. That is beautiful, Corrie. Thank you very much for sharing that. I really appreciated your sharing of personal examples and also how you built your team on kingdom values and getting to know each other like a family and even having fun together, I think, which naturally brought vulnerability and bonding. And I think also you mentioned focusing on service, that all the people that you've been put in influence with, focusing on serving in those relationships rather than thinking, how can I strategically evangelize this person? Instead thinking, how can I serve this person? How can I build a relationship? So
Absolutely.
Thank you. Are there any resources that have helped you along your way in your journey? Anything that you want to share?
Funny you should ask, because I had grabbed one right before this. This is my absolute favorite book of all time, and you can see that it is well worn. This is probably even my third copy of it because I use them until they fall apart. It's by Poole, and it's written by a Christian. It is a book of 1,001 questions. And I use this everywhere I go, and especially in the workplace when people are kind of awkwardly sitting around a table having a conversation, say at a meal, about the same old thing that you have a conversation. How was your day? How was your weekend? Which are great. Those are great. But what I always do, and what I always did, was say, hey, does anybody want to play a lunch game or a conversation game? Or anybody up for a game? And people generally are like, sure. And I say, okay, pick a number. And they pick a number, and I open the book and read the question according to that number. And it goes from lighthearted questions down to deep, kind of intense spiritual matters, but that people from any faith can answer. And it brought about some of the most incredible conversations that I really believe the Holy Spirit was involved in, which numbers people just randomly picked. And I loved using this just with a mix of faith background people. So that is one I would definitely say. It's called The Complete Book of Questions, 1001. And another book I would recommend is by Jeff Van Duzer. And that is called Why Business Matters to God and What Still Needs to Be Fixed. And it really talks about your own story, the story through which you live your life, and how that can naturally flow into your workplace and your ministry, and those two really as one and the same.
I love that. Thank you. Mm-hmm. That question book, I downloaded that on my phone as well, so I can always have it with me if I don't want to carry it.
Great idea.
So thank you very much, Corrie, and we'll bring you back on in just a moment for Q&A.
Okay.
All right. So now we are going to have a time for live Q&A. Many of you submitted questions during your online registration. So many great questions, and some of them are beyond the scope of today's topic, but we actually discussed many of them in our Work as Global Local Missions Conference last fall. So please do take a look back at those videos. There's a lot of your questions answered there as well. I also encourage you to take a look back at the previous webinar that we did on how does my work in a secular environment have an impact. And we have another webinar coming up on July 17th. How do I discern God's path for my career development? So some of your questions were on that topic. We're going to address those coming up on July 17th. So subscribe to our YouTube channel or sign up for the newsletters to get more updates on those. Today, we're going to be addressing some of your questions from registration and from the YouTube live chat. So please continue to type those. I'm going to ask all of our speakers to come back on now. They're coming back on. All right. So our first question, let me pull up. I'm going to pull some from registration. Our first question really was about, there was a lot of questions coming in about specific real life examples. So I think Corrie just shared a real life example about how one of her staff asked her how she was handling these hard things in her life, and she was able to share about her faith in a very natural way. So I would like to just hear some examples from the three of you about stories. Some questions came in about letting people know that you're a Jesus follower without people making assumptions about you based on past experiences or maybe things they see in the media. So maybe if you have a practical story about that, about letting people know that you're a Jesus follower, or if you have a practical story about being a believer and making that known in a place, in an environment where evangelism is specifically not allowed, possibly where it's been told that evangelism is not allowed. What does that look like to still share your faith in that environment? So yeah, I'd just like to hear any personal stories, whether they're just a quick sentence you said or more of a long conversation or relationship. Yeah, I'd love to hear any personal stories.
Yeah, I can go really quickly. One is that our bosses, you typically ask at my current place of work, just how our weekend was. And for most Christians that I know, their weekend has to do something with church on Sunday morning. And so being able to just say, like, I went to church or I hung out. Right now, I'm going to be meeting some friends from church after this event to go hang out in the park, play with our daughter and play some board games, do some lawn games if the rain holds back. Talking about your weekend is great because it's personal. It's very, very clear about what you do. A more specific one is when I was engaged, people can be nosy. People will ask you about your relationship all the time. But when you think about relationships differently, or you think about conflict with an in-law differently, you can have a little bit more depth to the conversation. So I was able to say why I believe that marriage is even a thing that I needed to be pursuing, or I thought that I should be pursuing, and what that does to be a part of a church, which is the bride of Christ, and what that means, and how you don't give up on that relationship, and how it's more covenantal than romantic. And it helped a lot of my colleagues go, oh wow, like this guy is thinking way too deep about this. Does he just like her? And it is deeper for us because of what it represents. And I think that a lot of things that we do that are light are just really good segues, like Jesus did practically, of it's not just a farmer throwing seed in the field. Those seeds mean something. I can take that and make it deeper. And then you're not evangelizing, but you are evangelizing in how you have those stories. It's so crucial to be able to take those things that you do just by being a Jesus follower and transition them. That's one of the ways that I do that.
Thanks, Femi. Anybody else?
I'll say, I love how you said you're not evangelizing, but you are evangelizing. And I think our whole notion of evangelism is getting messed with, which I love. It's, the St. Francis of Assisi, go spread the gospel, use words if necessary kind of thing is what it brings to mind. And I love this idea of we're just living our lives. And increasingly, if we're really living in alignment, if we're really living the way, like what Christine was saying about, obeying the Lord and what he's saying, people are going to notice because it's weird. It's definitely different. And I think it felt most different for me in China because, you have so many different cultures, intermixing together, but it's starting to feel like that a little bit now that I've been back in the US for a couple of years, where people are starting to kind of form these camps and different mindsets. And if we're living, the way that he's calling us to live, it's going to be noticed. And a small example that came to mind as Femi was talking was just how I make big decisions in my life is I pray about it, right? Like I have to. And so that language comes up when I talk about my life all the time. And that word, like, yeah, I prayed about it, or my husband and I sat down and prayed about it. And this is what we sensed after. And you can, and a lot of times that'll get let go, and nobody will follow up, but it's an invitation to have them be like, wait, can you tell me more about that? What God are you praying to? So that's a natural way that I work it into conversation. And that just happens. Yeah. I don't even work it in intentionally. That's the way I talk.
Yeah, I love that. I would just add, sometimes when you're working, oftentimes when you're working, you have an agenda, right? And you have the things that you have to do when it comes to projects or meetings or programs, whatever. Have an agenda, sure. When it comes to people, don't. Just don't. Just be present, listen, think about them as God would see them, that they are created in the image and likeness of God. So the more you spend time with them, even if they might look different from you, they might think differently from you, they might live their life differently from you, but they are still created in the image and likeness of God. And so with that lens of like, I want to know God more, and like this person, there's something about my creator in this person, right? It may not be easy to identify it just yet, but it's like building these relationships is a way for us to know God more. And it just sort of shifts your attitude, at least for me, shifts my attitude a little bit and makes me more eager to hear and to listen and to really understand, okay, where are they coming from? What might I learn from this interaction? And there's an excitement about it, but then it's not this like anxious like interaction, but there's just an excitement about wanting to get to know this person because I will get to know God more as I know them more.
Amen. Thank you,
Right
Christine. That's great. Yeah, and feel free to share more personal examples as we keep going through the Q&A. I think those practical examples are really helpful. I'm going to shift a little bit into the current nature of our work. I know a lot of our work has gone remote during COVID. And even beyond that, outside of COVID, a lot of our work is digital anyway. The work that we do is digital. We're on the computer, we're on Zoom. We're not always face-to-face with our coworkers or our customers. And so several questions came in around how do we maintain a culture of hope in this kind of remote life? And also how do we affect culture and build relationships when we are working remotely, or even if we're working in person, but a lot of our interactions are digital? How do we build meaningful relationships in that kind of environment?
An example of what we did, I was working for a university the last 3 years, and when COVID hit, we missed that. When we met as a staff, we really missed some of those just daily interactions, maybe right before the meeting would start, just shooting the breeze. So what we created was just a 15-minute window before our meeting started to all log in and to not talk about work at all. And you just to be there, and not to be on your phone either, but to just chat and talk about each other's personal lives and see how things were going. And that really helped us feel connected when we didn't have those chance interactions in the hallway anymore, or times like that to arrive early to a meeting or things like that. So that's one way.
Yeah, my answer would be similar. I think that what Corrie said hits the nail on the head of you have to create the space when it comes to the digital period that we're in. And sometimes that will be setting up meeting block on your calendar where nobody schedules over it. So you can either meet with a person or you have access to different things. I know people will set their lunch hour to just check in with people that they know across the country. And sometimes internationally to make sure that they're doing okay. And it's really important to think about in the pie chart of your time, what is that sliver of that time that you're using and allotting and saying, that's my check-in on people and make sure that I'm not forgetting that aspect of who God is as a relational God, as a God who cares about community. I think remembering Christine's 3 C's of character, competency, community, the community aspect is so big for me because in the United States, there's the rugged individualism, historical nature of like the way we build things and how we have this sort of isolation around task competency can sometimes hurt our reminders away from those agendas, away from that efficiency to, like Christine said, not having an agenda and basically making an agenda to not have an agenda. That's really, really important. And there's not a real substitution for that. You got to have that time set aside.
Yeah, I agree with what Corrie and Femi shared. I'd also add that staying conscious of the bigger picture. I think working from home and, staring at a screen all day, it can be easy to just forget, hey, why am I doing all this again? And I think, as followers of Jesus and those called to love, like, we should be seeing our work through a different lens and being a voice in these meetings throughout the day to just remind people why we're doing this, right? We're impacting customers' lives. For me, my work directly impacts over, 60,000 store employees around the world. Just sort of remembering the implications of like what you do in your home. It may feel very mundane and tedious, but like it impacts customers, suppliers, and other employees, etc. And just reminding people of that, I think, creates a burst of fresh energy and connection that, like, yes, we are doing something bigger than ourselves. And I think that is an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
And during the pandemic, for me working on COVID response, which has been insane, and the hours have been crazy. Building boundaries has been a little bit insane, and so, but I have found that my relationships with my coworkers has deepened because the work has been intense, and it just has required, it has necessitated holding hands in a much different way. And the boundaries that maybe used to exist, they could not exist in order for us to be successful in navigating this unprecedented time, whether that's geographical boundaries or organizational boundaries between like headquarters and the field, or the employees on the ground. Like, we needed each other. And so I have found that as you focus on the bigger picture, what is the bigger problem, the bigger thing that you're trying to do together, it brings people closer together.
Mm-hmm.
It's the annoying part. The challenging part is when you forget, right? You just, when you get so tunneled into whatever like thing that you're doing and it's just about yourself, then you just miss that opportunity to really connect on a deeper level. Because I also realized, being in the industry that I'm in, some people don't like the small talk. That's just not how they connect. Some people do, but some people don't. And for some people, building a relationship is more about like doing stuff together. And then when you like achieve stuff together, it actually opens up that friendship on a deeper level, which is awesome.
Yeah, the questions are great for small talk. That's absolutely right. To Christine's point about people who don't like small talk, sometimes the question in terms of that contextualization and then perception is, if I have an accurate perception that they don't like small talk, or I've asked them and said, you don't like this? And they're like, no, I don't. Is to say through like, okay, well, what can I do to make your job easier so you can do it more efficiently, or so you can get through things? Because if that's something that I remove a barrier, they will appreciate you in that way, that God removes certain barriers from certain people's lives. Some people grow up without any barriers that are typical of many, many other people, because God has just said, that's what I've ordained. And in the same sort of confusion it can be for us at a human level, of Jacob have I loved, Esau I've hated. God does what he does, but we can take a lesson from that and go, hey, this person doesn't like small talk. What can I do to make their life easier? Like, let me just ask them that. And that way I don't have to worry about that. They remember that they told me, and I tried to follow to do the thing I thought was going to be the most loving for them.
You also asked, I love that. Laura, you also asked, I was thinking about the how do we maintain hope in the midst of this? I think it's really easy to unplug from community in these times. I know people's churches are doing different things, but just to press in personally, especially knowing that we have our circle of influence at work, to press into to community, even if it feels and looks strange and different, because when we are filled up and when we are taking care of ourselves, that has a trickle down effect to everyone we work with, and how our attitudes are, how we are, how we function. And so I think we have a responsibility in these kinds of times to know what our place is in the body of Christ in whatever city we're living in. What am I a hand? Am I an eye? Am I a foot? Like, am I operating within that body of Christ? Because you're not alone. You shouldn't be thinking of yourself like, I'm my own, I just need to follow the Lord the best I can. No, you are connected to a body of believers. And are you functioning with those people? Are you allowing those people to speak into your life when you're struggling? And so are you staying hopeful by being connected into the body of Christ? That's would be my advice and encouragement.
All right. Thank you to all three of you. As we finish up, do any of you have any kind of final thoughts that came to you as we were discussing the questions, or anything else you wanted to share before we finish up?
Briefly, I'll say that all three of us talked about alignment or purpose, knowing what you're doing, again, because it helps set those priorities. So that's one big thing. Make sure that if you don't know it, if you have to ask somebody, if you have to take out a sheet of paper and sit in a room without a screen for a little bit and put on some like meditation music or whatever and write out what am I doing to like some of Christine's questions of why do I do what I do? Think of like I'll align, get aligned. That's one thing. The other thing is we're also all talking about the way you develop your individual competency is critical to your trajectory. I would never say I'm even the best person on my team, but I would say that I'm dedicated to the team's goal. I'm absolutely dedicated to our team being able to put things out to support our field well. And dedication to the goal of the team is part of your individual competency. And the other thing is, like Corrie just said, community is so important. The reason why a lot of people are struggling mental health wise in the last year or so is because of the physical isolation. Turn on your camera when you're on a Zoom, like turn on your camera when you're on Teams or on a FaceTime. Let people see you, let people see your smile, let people see that there's this eternal hope that you have. Do everything you can to remember that although your individual competency is important and your dedication to the goal is important, you are a part of a larger group and a family of believers worldwide who are going through things. Pray for the Philippines, pray for India right now. India is going through a lot of hurt right now in closer ways to me than I initially knew than a couple weeks ago. Pray for believers in the world, and remember this is a global thing and we're only here for a season, and then we get to go be with the Father Eternal, the creator of the universe, and it will be so much more joyous. Like we're only here for a little bit. So those are the two things that like sort of stick in my head.
Thank you, Femi. Any other closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts is, for me, it's more than anything, the Lord wants us to be in relationship with him, and everything else that we've talked about today flows out of that. So to just, even if it's like, it may feel overwhelming. I get the sense that all of these things may feel overwhelming. Okay, I'm going to keep this verse in mind, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. But if we can just keep it simple and say, Lord, be with me today as I go to work, or as I turn on my Zoom for the day. Fill me with some ideas for how to navigate these meetings. Let me notice and quiet myself enough to just recognize things that you might be bringing up, stirring up, relationships, a person that you might be highlighting. And can we quiet ourselves enough to just keep it simple with Jesus every day and trust that the little that we're doing locally he is going to cause that global impact. We don't have to worry about how to save the world and do all the big things. He may put us on strategic teams to think through those things, and that's awesome. And he may not. And to know that the small things that he puts on our hearts every day as we're faithful to listen to those things add up and create that ripple and that impact. So to not underestimate what you just saying, Lord, be with me today in my work, can do in the world.
Amen. I agree. The question of this webinar is, how do I foster meaningful relationships in this workplace culture? It really does start with your relationship with God. And how do you even know what a meaningful relationship is, right? And how do you even know what love is if you're not connected with God, who is love? And so I do definitely agree with that. So as you hear these words that Jesus commands us to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves, and you're kind of thinking like, I don't really know what that means or what that looks like, I invite you to pray that prayer of, Lord, would you reveal to me your love? And that it materially impacts how I wake up in the morning, and just keep praying that prayer. Reveal to me your love, because it's through our experience of his love that then he will reveal to us how to best love and cultivate meaningful relationships and be a mover and shaker in whatever context that we're in. So I invite you to pray that prayer today if it is a question that you have in mind. Lord, reveal to me your love.
Love that.
All right, thank you. And with that, I think we are going to pray together, and then I'll wrap up. So, dear God, we thank you today for these speakers, and thank you for all of those who attended and who are listening and who will listen to the recording later on. God, I ask that you would reveal yourself to us, that we would know your love, that we would live in your love, that we would learn how to be in deeper relationship with you, and that we would learn how to love others around us authentically. God, that can get really messy and it can get really confusing. So we ask that you would guide us, that you would put us into community where we can have authentic conversations with others around us about these struggles that we're having at work and how to build authentic relationships. And I ask that you would guide us at our work. Please help each one of us today to walk away with a next step from you, that you would show us how you want us to move forward in this area in our workplace. And we ask that ultimately that you would be glorified and honored and reflected in our workplace. And it's in your son's name we pray. Amen. Amen. Well, thank you, all three of you.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you. It's a pleasure to have all three of you.
Thanks everyone around the world.
Opportunity.
Yeah. I'm going to
Take care.
wrap up with a few more thoughts and then we'll be done. So you guys can go ahead and sign off, speakers, and a few more things to share. So thank you, all of you, for joining us today. We encourage you to continue this conversation. It doesn't start today. It doesn't stop today. Today is the beginning of this conversation. So you can join the conversation on social media of any of the three organizations. You can take a look back at the resources that were recommended today. And you can also join our next webinar, which is How Do I Discern God's Path for My Career Development? That's coming up on July 17th. If you want details on registration, stay tuned by subscribing to the YouTube channel or signing up for the newsletter, and we will get details out about registration. Thank you again for joining us, and blessings to all of you as you glorify God in your work. Have a great day.